If the documents were signed today, effectively making Ukraine the 33rd member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the geopolitical reality of the world would shift violently within the first 60 minutes. The moment the ink dries in Brussels, the special military operation currently recognized by the Kremlin ceases to be a regional conflict and instantaneously transforms into a world war. This is not hyperbole, it is a legal certainty embedded in the Washington Treaty. The core mechanism here is Article 5, which states that an armed attack against one member is considered an attack against them all. Currently, Russian cruise missiles, artillery, and drone strikes are actively hitting Ukrainian soil. If Ukraine is a NATO member, every single Russian shell that lands in the Donbas or Kyiv is legally identical to a Russian missile striking Berlin, London, or New York City. The first 24 hours would be a chaotic blur of diplomatic cables being severed in military defense conditions, DEFCON levels spiking to heights not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. In this scenario, NATO commanders would not wait for a political debate. The pre-planned rapid response protocols would activate. The NATO Response Force NRF, currently consisting of 40,000 high-readiness troops, would immediately be given green lights to engage Russian targets directly to defend Allied territory. Simultaneously, the Kremlin would view the succession as the crossing of their ultimate red line. Vladimir Putin has explicitly stated for decades that Ukraine and NATO is an existential threat to the Russian Federation. Therefore, Moscow would not view this as a political defeat, but as a declaration of total war by the West. In these first crucial hours, we would likely see Russia attempting to inflict maximum damage before NATO air superiority can be established. This would involve a decapitation strike strategy, mass volleys of hypersonic Kinzhal and Sirkin missiles targeting not just Ukrainian infrastructure, but potentially logistics hubs in Poland and Romania that facilitate the transfer of weaponry. The ambiguity of the proxy war would vanish. American F-35s and British Typhoons, currently patrolling the borders, would likely engage Russian Su-35s and Su-57s over the skies of Eastern Europe. The fog of war would be thickest here. A single miscommunication or a radar glitch could result in tactical nuclear weapons being readied. The global financial markets would crash instantly. The sheer uncertainty of direct conflict between the world's two largest nuclear powers would freeze liquidity, sending oil prices skyrocketing to over $200 a barrel and causing stock exchanges from Tokyo to Wall Street to halt trading. This first phase is not just about troop movements. It is about the psychological shock to the global order, realizing that the buffer zone is gone, and the great powers are now continuously shooting directly at one another. As the initial shock of the first 24 hours settles, the conflict would enter a kinetic phase of unprecedented intensity, highlighting the argument on your thumbnail. NATO needs Ukraine. Paradoxically, while bringing Ukraine in risks World War III, military analysts argue that Ukraine possesses the only army in Europe with actual, high-intensity combat experience against Russian forces. If integrated, the Ukrainian Armed Forces UAF would essentially become NATO's vanguard or spearhead on the eastern flank. Currently, most European NATO armies are designed for expeditionary warfare or counterterrorism, not trench warfare and massive artillery duels. Ukraine brings over 1 million battle-hardened personnel who understand Russian doctrine, electronic warfare, and logistics better than any Western general. In this phase, we would see the full integration of NATO C4IS or command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance directly with Ukrainian frontline units. Instead of passing intelligence through back channels, a Ukrainian artillery commander in Donetsk would have a direct, real-time data link to a US Global Hawk drone or an AWACS plane circling over the Black Sea. This would create a kill chain so fast that Russian forces would be unable to maneuver without being destroyed instantly. However, the Russian response to this integration would be total mobilization. The Kremlin would likely transition its economy to a full war footing, far beyond current levels. The concept of limited objectives would vanish. We would see the Russian Navy attempt a total blockade of the Black Sea, mining international waters and threatening civilian shipping to starve Europe of energy and grain. The battle space would expand beyond Ukraine's borders. The Suwalki Gap, the narrow strip of land connecting Poland to Lithuania, would become the most dangerous place on Earth, as Russia might try to close it to link up with its exclave of Kaliningrad. This is where the air war becomes critical. NATO's doctrine relies heavily on air supremacy. Hundreds of fifth-generation fighters, F-35s and F-22s, would be tasked with SEAD missions, suppression of enemy air defenses, to destroy Russia's S-400 and S-500 systems. This is not a video game. These systems are lethal, and NATO would lose pilots. The escalation ladder here is steep. If Russia feels its conventional forces are collapsing under the weight of combined NATO air power, their military doctrine allows for the use of tactical nuclear weapons to escalate to de-escalate. This means detonating a low-yield nuke on a troop concentration or a logistics hub to force NATO to back down. This is the terrifying paradox. Ukraine strengthens NATO's conventional power on the ground, but its accession drastically lowers the threshold for a nuclear exchange, forcing NATO planners to prepare for a radioactive battlefield in Europe for the first time in history. While the missiles fly in Europe, the rest of the world would suffer a catastrophic economic and geopolitical fracture, effectively ending the era of globalization as we know it. The accession of Ukraine into NATO would force every nation to pick a side, destroying the neutrality that countries like India, Brazil, and arguably China have tried to maintain. The West would implement a total embargo on Russia, not just sanctions, but a complete blockade. No Russian oil, gas, aluminum, or wheat would be allowed to move. In retaliation, Russia would cut off all remaining gas flows to Europe instantly. European industry, specifically the German manufacturing sector, would face an immediate energy collapse, leading to rationing, blackouts, and factory shutdowns. Inflation would not just rise, it would hyperinflate as global supply chains shatter. We are talking about a scenario where the price of bread in North Africa and the Middle East triples overnight due to the cessation of Black Sea grain shipments, potentially triggering a new wave of Arab Spring-style revolutions and mass migration crises that would overwhelm European borders, further destabilizing NATO members from within. Crucially, we must look at China. Beijing is watching this scenario closely regarding Taiwan. If Ukraine joins NATO and the West becomes bogged down in a direct, resource-draining war with Russia, China might view this as the perfect window of opportunity. They know the US cannot effectively fight a two-front war against peer adversaries simultaneously. Consequently, China might bolster Russia economically to keep the US distracted, providing lethal aid, semiconductors, and financial lifelines to Moscow. This would create a rigid bipolar world. The West NATO, EU, Australia, Japan versus the East Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. The United Nations Security Council would become completely defunct, paralyzed by permanent vetoes. Cyber warfare would move from espionage to destruction. Russian hacker groups, likely state-sponsored, would target Western critical infrastructure power grids, water treatment plants, and banking systems in London, Frankfurt, and New York. This wouldn't just be a war of soldiers, it would be a war on the civilian way of life. Your bank account could be frozen, the internet could go dark, and GPS systems could be jammed, disrupting global aviation and logistics. The business files aspect here is grim. Trillions of dollars of wealth would be wiped out. Insurance companies would declare force majeure, and the global economy would contract sharper than during the Great Depression. The final paragraph addresses the ultimate question: how does this end? If Ukraine joins NATO today, there are only two realistic trajectories, and neither involves a simple peace treaty in the short term. The first trajectory is the total collapse of the Russian Federation. Unable to match the combined conventional industrial might of 32 NATO nations plus Ukraine, the Russian military machine grinds to a halt. Massive casualties and economic isolation lead to internal unrest in Moscow. In this scenario, the oligarchs or the military elite might turn on Vladimir Putin to save their own fortunes, leading to a coup or regime change. A new Russian government might sue for peace, retreating to the 1991 borders in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. This is the best-case scenario for the West, a victory for democracy and the neutralization of the Russian threat for a generation. However, it is also the least likely because it assumes rational actors in a system built on paranoia. The second and far darker trajectory is the Fortress Russia scenario, leading to total devastation. If the Kremlin views the war as a fight for survival against a satanic West, a narrative already pushed by Russian state media, they will not surrender. They will mobilize every man, utilize every weapon, and potentially strike NATO capitals. If NATO ground troops eventually push into Russian territory or even Crimea, which Russia considers its territory, the Russian nuclear doctrine is triggered. We are not just talking about tactical nukes now. We are talking about strategic intercontinental ballistic missiles (ICBMs). The world relies on the theory of mutually assured destruction (MAD) to prevent this, but MAD assumes both sides fear death more than defeat. If the Russian leadership believes that a NATO-Ukraine victory means their personal execution or the dissolution of Russia, they might choose to take the world down with them. Therefore, Ukraine joining NATO is a high-stakes gamble. It is the ultimate security guarantee for Kyiv, ensuring that Russia can never invade again without facing the full might of the US military. But the cost of that insurance policy is bringing the entire human race to the edge of the nuclear precipice. The video concludes with this thought: NATO needs Ukraine to win the conventional fight, but does the world need the risk that comes with it? The decision to admit Ukraine isn't just about borders. It's about deciding whether the current global order is worth risking a global apocalypse to defend.